The champagne glass in Maya Reyes's hand had gone warm an hour ago, but she kept holding it anyway. It gave her something to do with her fingers besides clench them. The Vane Syndicate estate glittered like something out of a magazine nobody could afford to subscribe to. Crystal chandeliers threw gold light across 300 guests. Bankers, diplomats, men who ran cities without anyone voting for them. Tonight was Dominic Vane's formal inauguration as head of the syndicate, and Maya was standing beside him, wearing a dress that cost more than her mother's old apartment, feeling like an intruder in her own marriage. She'd married Dominic 8 months ago, fast, sudden, and, according to everyone in this room, deeply suspicious. "There she is," Aunt Victoria's voice cut across the string quartet like a blade through silk. The room quieted the way rooms do when someone powerful decides to make a scene. The wife. Maya turned. Victoria Vane approached in emerald silk, flanked by 2 board members who suddenly found their shoes fascinating. "I've been patient," Victoria said, loud enough for the nearest 20 guests to hear. "I've watched my nephew parade you around for months. A girl with no family name, no fortune, no business being anywhere near this family." She smiled, and it did not reach her eyes. "Tell me, dear, was it the money or just the title?" Heat crawled up Maya's neck. She felt Dominic go rigid beside her, his jaw tightening, but before he could speak, Victoria produced a folder from her clutch, like a magician pulling out the trick she'd been saving all night. "A generous offer," Victoria said, holding it out. £5 million. Sign the divorce papers tonight and you disappear with your dignity intact. Refuse, and I promise you'll leave with neither." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone's champagne glass paused halfway to their lips. Maya felt 300 pairs of eyes on her skin, like static. She opened her mouth. She didn't even know yet what she was going to say, when the doors at the far end of the ballroom slammed open. Sirens. Not far away. Here. Blue and red light strobed against the marble floor as a dozen federal agents flooded the entrance, followed by men in dark suits carrying tablets instead of weapons. International banking regulators. The kind of men whose signatures could freeze a country's economy before breakfast. "Dominic Vane." The lead agent's voice carried the flat authority of someone who'd rehearsed this. "By order of the International Financial Crimes Division, all corporate accounts held by the Vane Syndicate are hereby frozen, effective immediately." The ballroom erupted. Guests scattered toward exits or clustered in stunned knots. Victoria's divorce folder slipped from her hand, forgotten, papers fanning across the marble. "On what grounds?" Dominic's voice was ice calm, but Maya, who'd learned to read the small tells beneath his composure, saw his hand curl into a fist at his side. The agent held up a tablet. $400 million in forged collateral bonds. They underpin your primary banking license, Mr. Vane. As of tonight, the syndicate does not legally exist. 400 million. Maya's mind, the part of her that had spent 6 years analyzing fraud cases before she'd ever met Dominic Vane, snapped awake like a light switching on. Forged collateral bonds don't appear overnight. Someone built this slowly. Someone with access. She looked past the agents, past the scattering guests, at Victoria, who was not looking shocked. Victoria was looking at the floor, at her own dropped papers, her face pale in a way that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with fear. She knew this was coming, Maya thought. Not the details, but she knew something was coming. The board members around Victoria were already peeling away from her, phones out, whispering. In this world, Maya had learned fast, loyalty had the shelf life of good milk. The moment the money froze, so did everyone's affection. Dominic turned to her, not to the agents, not to his aunt, not to the wreckage of his own inauguration party collapsing around him. To her. Maya. His voice dropped low, meant only for her. "Come with me. Now." She should have been terrified. 10 minutes ago, she'd been publicly called a gold digger and offered money to vanish. Now her husband's entire empire had just been seized in front of everyone he'd spent his life trying to impress. But as Dominic's hand found hers and pulled her through the chaos toward the private hallway behind the ballroom, Maya felt something else entirely, something sharper than fear. Curiosity. Because whoever had done this hadn't just attacked a company. They'd attacked it with surgical precision, timed to the exact night the world was watching. That wasn't rage. That wasn't a family feud. That was a plan. And Maya Reyes, before she'd ever been a Vane, had spent years learning how to read plans like this one, how to trace them back to the hand that drew them. Whoever had just torched the Vane Syndicate's empire in front of 300 witnesses was about to learn that the woman they'd called a gold digger held a different currency entirely. She just hoped Dominic was ready to find out exactly who his wife really was. The private office was 3 floors below the estate's east wing, accessible only by a keypad and a retinal scanner Maya hadn't known existed until Dominic pressed his eye to it without hesitation. The steel door sealed behind them with a hiss that swallowed the chaos upstairs completely. Inside, the room was nothing like the gilded excess above. Bare concrete walls, 3 monitors glowing in the dark, a single steel desk with nothing on it but a locked drawer and a landline that Maya suspected wasn't connected to any ordinary network. "What is this place?" she asked. "Somewhere Victoria doesn't have access." Dominic pulled off his jacket and threw it over a chair, and for the first time since she'd met him, Maya saw the mask slip entirely. Not the composed air, not the ballroom host, just a man staring down the collapse of everything his father had built. "Dominic," she stepped closer. "Talk to me." He turned, and there was something raw in his face she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not even fear. Something closer to relief, strange as that seemed. "I married you fast," he said. "Everyone thinks I did it to make a point to my aunt, to spite the family." "Didn't you?" "No," he exhaled. "I married you because 6 months ago, before any of this, I had you investigated the way I investigate everyone who gets close to me. And what I found wasn't a woman chasing money. I found a forensic auditor who took down a hedge fund laundering scheme in Manila and then walked away from the reward money because she didn't want her name on it." His eyes held hers. "I didn't bring you into my life to be my wife, Maya. Not only that, I brought you in because I knew, someday, I'd need someone I could trust who was smarter than everyone circling me." Maya's chest tightened. 8 months of feeling like an outsider in her own marriage, and he was telling her now, in the wreckage of the worst night of his life, that she'd been the plan all along. "You could have told me," she said quietly. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was using you like everyone else uses everyone in this family?" She didn't have an answer for that, so instead she held out her hand. "Show me the seizure documents, all of them." Something shifted in his face. Surprise, maybe, that she hadn't asked for comfort or explanation first, just the evidence. He pulled a tablet from the locked drawer and passed it over. Maya sat at the steel desk, and the ballroom, the champagne glass, Victoria's folder full of humiliation, all of it fell away. This was the version of herself she knew best, not the wife in the expensive dress, the analyst. She scrolled through page after page of collateral bond documentation, the audit trail the regulators had used to justify the freeze. Numbers, timestamps, digital signatures. Most people's eyes would glaze over within the first paragraph. Maya's sharpened. "These bonds," she murmured, half to herself. "They're dated 18 months back. But the verification stamps." She zoomed in. "These were generated using a signature protocol that wasn't even in commercial use 18 months ago. Someone backdated these. Recently." Dominic leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating off him. "Backdated by who?" "That's the interesting part." Maya traced the digital signature embedded in the audit trail, cross-referencing it against a private database she'd quietly maintained since her Manila days, a personal archive of fraud signatures she'd cataloged over the years, the way some people collected stamps. This exact signature pattern, I've seen it before. Not from your family's usual enemies, not rival syndicates, not disgruntled partners. She looked up at him. This is the fingerprint of a private equity raider, someone who specializes in engineering hostile takeovers by manufacturing a crisis, tanking the target's credit rating, and then swooping in with a rescue offer once the company's desperate enough to sign anything. Dominic went very still. You're saying this wasn't sabotage? It was a setup? I'm saying whoever did this didn't want to destroy the Vane Syndicate. Maya's pulse quickened, the way it always did when a puzzle started resolving into a shape. They want to own it, and they built this trap months before tonight, which means someone inside gave them the access to plant it. Dominic finished the thought, his voice flat with the particular fury of a man realizing he'd been betrayed from close range. Someone who knew the banking license inside and out. Someone with clearance to the primary collateral accounts. Maya didn't say Victoria's name. She didn't need to. They were both thinking it, and both smart enough not to accuse a woman of treason based on a facial expression at a party. We need proof, Maya said, not suspicion. This signature pattern, I've only ever seen fragments of it before. If I can find where it originated, we can trace it to whoever's actually running this. Dominic studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression settled, like a decision he'd been carrying for 8 months had finally been confirmed. Then we find it together. You read the money. I handle everyone who doesn't want it read. He held out his hand, not for comfort this time, but like a partner sealing a deal. Where do we start? Maya pulled up a geographic tag buried in the metadata, one small string of code the forgers hadn't bothered to scrub. A vault registration. A location. Switzerland, she said. The original paper deeds for your family's foundational assets are still there. If someone tampered with the digital records, the physical ledgers will tell us what the real numbers were supposed to say and where the fake ones got slipped in. Dominic was already reaching for his coat. Then we fly tonight. Upstairs, the party was still unraveling, 300 guests fleeing into the London night with a story that would be tomorrow's headline. But down here, in a windowless room built for secrets, Maya Reyes had just stopped being the woman humiliated at her husband's inauguration. She'd become the only person standing between the Vane Syndicate and total ruin. And for the first time all night, she felt exactly where she belonged. The private vault beneath Zurich's financial district didn't officially exist. That was the point, Dominic explained as their car wound through pre-dawn streets slick with rain. The kind of institution that catered exclusively to families whose wealth predated most modern banking laws, tucked behind 3 separate shell corporations and a discretion policy that made Swiss privacy laws look talkative. My grandfather opened this vault in 1962, Dominic said, watching the city blur past the window. Every Vane patriarch since has added to it. Deeds, founding contracts, the original licenses that built everything upstairs into something legitimate. He glanced at her. If someone wanted to understand exactly what the syndicate's true assets were worth enough to fake a collateral shortfall around, they'd need to know what's down there. Almost nobody does. Which narrows our suspect list, Maya said. It narrows it to family. They didn't say Victoria's name again. They didn't need to. It sat between them the entire flight, an unspoken weight neither of them was ready to fully carry yet. The vault entrance was unremarkable, a nondescript door in a nondescript basement beneath a private banking office that had closed for the night hours ago. 2 guards flanked it, syndicate men Maya didn't recognize, men whose loyalty apparently answered only to bloodline. Dominic exchanged a few clipped words in German, produced a signet ring Maya had never seen him wear before, and the door unsealed, with a sound like a vault in an old film, heavy, mechanical, final. "You handle the ground floor," Maya said, already moving toward the archive shelves lining the back wall. "I'll start on the ledgers." Dominic caught her wrist gently before she could go. "Maya, if Victoria really is behind this, then we'll have proof, not accusations." She held his gaze. "That's the only thing that matters right now." He nodded once, released her hand, and turned to check the vault's perimeter with the guards. The physical work, the kind he was built for, while Maya did the work she was built for. The ledgers were beautiful in a way modern spreadsheets never were. Leather-bound volumes with handwritten entries stretching back decades, ink faded to sepia in the oldest pages, crisper in the more recent ones. Maya pulled the last 3 years of foundational asset records and spread them across a reading table bolted to the vault floor. She worked in silence for nearly an hour, cross-referencing entry by entry against the digital audit trail she'd copied from Dominic's tablet. The numbers matched perfectly. Until they didn't. There, 6 months back, a line item she almost missed. A transfer of collateral valuation rights to a holding entity she didn't recognize, authorized with a signature that was technically valid but structurally strange, routed through an intermediary account instead of directly through the syndicate's primary ledger, the way every other transaction in the book had been recorded for 60 years. "Dominic," her voice cut through the vault's silence. "Come look at this." He crossed the room in 3 strides. She pointed to the entry. 6 months ago, someone authorized a valuation transfer through a shell company. She traced the registration number with her finger. Frankfurt. A holding entity called Rhineland Capital Partners. I've never heard of it, and it's not listed anywhere in your syndicate's official partner registry. Dominic's brow furrowed as he leaned in. That's not possible. Every valuation transfer needs board-level sign-off. My father made sure of it before he died. 3 signatures minimum, cross-verified. There are 3 signatures here. Maya turned the ledger toward him. But look at the verification stamps. 2 of them are legitimate board members. The third, she paused, zooming in with the small magnifying loupe she'd found in the vault's supply drawer. The third signature was authorized under emergency single-party override protocol, which means someone invoked crisis powers to push this through without full board review. Who has override authority? According to this, Maya said slowly, watching his face as she said it, only 3 people alive. You, your late father's estate trustee, and your aunt. The silence that followed was heavier than anything in the vault around them, heavier than the steel door, heavier than 60 years of family secrets pressed into leather bindings. "She used it 6 months ago," Dominic said finally, voice flat. "Right when the market was quiet. Right when nobody would have noticed a routine valuation adjustment buried in quarterly filings. She didn't authorize the forged bonds," Maya said carefully. "Not directly. This transfer predates the actual bond forgery by months. But it opened the door. It gave Rhineland Capital Partners legal standing inside your asset structure. A back door built quietly, months before anyone slammed it open tonight." Dominic picked up the ledger himself now, reading the entry again as though he could will it into saying something different. "Rhineland Capital Partners," he repeated. "I need to know who's actually behind that name. Shell companies always have a real owner buried somewhere." Maya was already pulling her phone from her coat, angling it to photograph the entry before they resealed the vault. "Frankfurt," she said. "That's where this entity is registered. If Rhineland's the door Victoria opened, then somewhere in Frankfurt is the room she let someone walk through." "Then that's where we go next." Dominic's jaw was tight, but his eyes, when they met hers, held something steadier than they had in the London office. Not relief, exactly, but the particular calm of a man who finally had a direction to point his fury. Maya closed the ledger carefully, the way you'd close something sacred, and looked at him. "Dominic, before we go further, if this really does lead back to Victoria, are you prepared for what that means? She raised you. She's family." He was quiet for a moment, the vault's cold air settling between them. "My father used to say the syndicate only survives on one rule," he said finally. "Family comes first. Until family becomes the threat. Then you treat them exactly like any other enemy." He closed his hand gently over hers on the ledger's cover. "I need to know the truth before I decide what she is to me. That's what you're here for." Maya nodded, and together they sealed the vault behind them, carrying a photograph of a 6-month-old secret into a war that had only just begun to reveal its true shape. The Dolder Grand rose above Zurich like a fairy tale castle that had wandered into the wrong century, all turrets and manicured grounds overlooking the lake. Dominic had booked the entire East Wing for what remained of the syndicate's senior board, 12 men and women who'd fled London hours after the seizure, gathering here under the polite fiction of crisis coordination. Maya stood at the back of the private conference room, deliberately out of the board's direct sightline, watching. Dominic had asked her to observe rather than announce their Frankfurt discovery yet, not until they understood exactly who they were dealing with. "Never show your hand before you know theirs," he'd told her on the drive over. And she'd recognized the same instinct she used when auditing a fraud case. Watch longer than feels comfortable. Victoria sat at the head of the table, composed again, the pale fear from the ballroom replaced by something colder and more practiced. Whatever guilt lived under that expression, she'd buried it deep. At 9 p.m. exactly, the doors opened, and Gabriel Sterling walked in like a man arriving at his own coronation. He was younger than Maya expected, mid-40s, silver threading early through dark hair, a tailored suit that whispered old money, even though Maya would have bet everything she owned that his money was newer than his manners. He carried himself with the ease of someone used to rooms falling quiet when he entered. "Dominic," Sterling extended a hand with the warmth of a man greeting an old friend, not a rival. "I came the moment I heard. Terrible business, this freeze. Absolutely terrible." Dominic shook his hand with visible restraint. "Gabriel, I didn't realize we'd invited outside investors." "You didn't?" Sterling smiled and turned to address the whole table, his voice sliding into the practiced cadence of a man who'd given this exact speech before, to other families, other empires on the edge. "But your board did, and frankly, someone needed to." He nodded, and 2 aides wheeled in a presentation screen. Numbers bloomed across it, clean, confident, generous. $500 million, Sterling announced. A private equity bridge loan available within 72 hours, enough to satisfy the regulators, unfreeze your accounts, and stabilize every operation the syndicate runs, from London to Rotterdam. He paused for effect. In exchange, Sterling Capital Group takes 51% controlling voting rights across all Vane Syndicate holdings. The room erupted into murmurs. 51% wasn't a bailout. It was a hostile acquisition wearing a rescue's clothing, and every person in that room with half a financial education knew it. Except, apparently, Victoria. "This is exactly the lifeline we need," she said, rising slightly from her chair, her voice pitched to Carrie. "Dominic, be reasonable. We have days, not months, before the regulators start seizing physical assets. Mr. Sterling is offering us survival." "He's offering us a leash," Dominic said flatly. "He's offering us air," Victoria snapped back, and for a moment the mask cracked wide enough that Maya saw real desperation underneath. Not the desperation of a woman worried about the family fortune, but something more specific, more personal. Fear of exposure, maybe. Fear that whatever deal she'd made months ago in that Zurich vault was about to unravel in front of everyone. Maya stayed silent, watching Sterling's aides distribute contract packets around the table, thick, glossy, already tabbed for signature. She let her eyes drift past the numbers, past the legal boilerplate, down to the fine print detailing the loan's underlying trust structure. And there it was, a registration code. Small, buried in a subclause about fund custodianship,
The kind of detail 99 people out of 100 would skip entirely. But Maya had spent an hour that afternoon photographing an almost identical string of characters off a leather ledger in a Swiss vault.
She excused herself quietly, stepped into the hallway, and pulled up the photograph on her phone. Her pulse ticked faster as she zoomed in, comparing character by character. The offshore trust structure funding Sterling's $500 million rescue used the exact same custodial registration format as Rhineland Capital Partners, the shell company that had quietly opened a back door into the Vane Syndicate's assets 6 months earlier. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a signature. The same legal architects, the same hidden hand, dressed up twice, once as the crisis, once as the cure. Maya slipped back into the conference room just as Sterling was pressing Victoria for a headcount vote. She caught Dominic's eye across the table and gave the smallest nod, the one they'd agreed on in the car, meaning, "I found something, don't let them sign yet." Dominic rose smoothly. "Before anyone signs anything, I'd like a short recess, 15 minutes. Sterling's easy smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes sharpened, just slightly, the look of a man recalculating. "Of course. No rush, Dominic. The office stands until midnight." The board filed out for coffee and hushed conversation, and Maya pulled Dominic into an adjoining alcove, phone still open. "The custodial trust funding Sterling's bailout," she said quietly, urgently. "It's the same structure as Rhineland Capital Partners, same registration format, same offshore jurisdiction, almost certainly the same law firm behind both filings." Dominic went very still. "You're saying Sterling built the crisis and the rescue. I'm saying Gabriel Sterling didn't come here tonight to save your family." Maya's voice dropped lower. "He came to collect on a trap he set 6 months ago, with someone inside this family holding the door open for him." Her eyes flicked, involuntarily, toward the hallway, where Victoria stood sipping coffee, laughing lightly with one of Sterling's aides, like nothing in the world was wrong. "We have the connection," Maya continued, "but it's circumstantial. A registration format isn't a courtroom. We need the actual transaction logs. Something that proves Sterling's people built the fake bonds directly, not just that his trust shares a filing style." Dominic's expression hardened into something Maya hadn't seen from him before. Not fury, but focus, cold and absolute. "Then we stop asking politely." He checked his watch. 11:40, 20 minutes before Sterling's midnight deadline. Rhineland Capital's registered office is a shell, but their servers aren't. Every transaction those bonds went through had to route through actual infrastructure somewhere. "Frankfurt," Maya said. "Frankfurt," Dominic agreed. "Tonight, we let Victoria think she's winning the vote. Tomorrow night, we take what Sterling's hiding before he even knows we're coming." Frankfurt's financial district after midnight looked like a city built entirely for machines. Glass towers with a scattering of lit windows where servers hummed through the dark long after the humans had gone home. Rhineland Capital Partners occupied the 11th floor of an unremarkable building sandwiched between two banks, exactly the kind of address designed to be forgotten the moment you walked past it. "Front desk security rotates at 1 a.m., Dominic said, watching the building from across the street through the tinted windows of a parked car. "Skeleton crew after that. 1 guard, cameras on a 30-second loop delay." "How do you know that?" Maya asked. "Because I paid someone very well to know that 3 hours ago." He glanced at her, something almost like amusement flickering through the tension in his jaw. "You handle numbers. I handle everything numbers can't fix." Maya had changed into dark clothing at the hotel, though she suspected she'd be doing very little of the physical work tonight. That was the plan they'd built on the flight back from Zurich. Dominic and 2 syndicate men would handle the building itself, the guard, the locked doors, the small, dangerous choreography of getting somewhere they weren't supposed to be. Maya's job started once they were inside, sitting in the car with a laptop and an earpiece, guiding him through server architecture she understood far better than any of them. "Com check," Dominic murmured once they were out of the car and moving toward the service entrance. "I hear you," Maya said, adjusting her earpiece. Her heart hammered harder than she expected. She'd read 100 fraud cases from the safety of an office chair. She'd never been the one on the other end of an earpiece while her husband walked into a building he had no legal right to enter. The next several minutes passed in clipped, quiet exchanges. A service door forced open, a guard redirected with practiced ease rather than violence. Dominic's man simply intercepted him on his rounds with a story about a burst pipe 2 floors down, buying them the window they needed. The elevator, disabled deliberately to avoid triggering floor sensors. Stairs instead, 11 flights, Dominic's breathing steady in her ear the entire way.
"We're in,"
He said finally, voice low. Server rooms locked, electronic keypad. "Give me 30 seconds. Maya pulled up the building's security specs Dominic's contact had provided earlier, the same specs that had told them about the guard rotation, and cross-referenced the keypad model against a database of default override codes she'd learned to keep memorized during her fraud investigation years, back when half her job had been proving companies too cheap to update their factory security settings. "Try 447791, she said. A pause. Then a soft click through the earpiece. "You're terrifying," Dominic murmured, and, despite everything, Maya almost laughed. "Focus. Find the primary server rack. Should be labeled with a Rhineland asset tag, blue lettering." She heard him moving through the room, the faint hum of cooling fans growing louder in her earpiece. "Found it. There's a maintenance port on the side panel, small, rectangular, probably covered by a plastic flap." "Got it. I need you to connect the drive I gave you. It'll take about 4 minutes to pull what we need. Transaction logs, time-stamped authorizations, anything routed through Rhineland's infrastructure in the last 8 months. The silence stretched while the drive worked, and Maya used it to pull up everything she could remotely access about Rhineland's network architecture, watching data begin to populate on her laptop screen in real time as the extraction ran. Numbers, dates, digital signatures. And then, 3 minutes in, something that made her breath catch. "Dominic," her voice sharpened. "I'm seeing live transaction data. This isn't historical. Rhineland's systems processed an authorization 40 minutes ago. 40 minutes ago, we were still at the hotel." "I know." Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the authorization's origin point. "It's a fund transfer. Small, only 200,000. But it's routed through the same custodial structure as Sterling's bailout trust." She felt the pieces sliding together, faster now, the way they always did once a case cracked open. "Dominic, this is a payment, a recent one, and the recipient account—" She stopped. "What?" Dominic said, and something in his voice told her he already sensed it wasn't going to be good. "The recipient account is registered to a private banking relationship manager," Maya said slowly, reading the details twice to be sure. "Based in London. Same firm that manages the personal accounts of the Vane family board." "Which board member?" Maya's throat tightened before she even said it aloud. "I can't pull the individual name from here. The account's held under an intermediary. But the timing, Dominic, 40 minutes ago, while we were still in the conference room, watching Victoria push everyone to sign Sterling's deal." There was a long pause on the line, long enough that Maya heard the extraction drive finish its download with a soft chime. "Pull everything," Dominic said finally, his voice gone hard and flat. "Every log, every authorization, every account trail this drive can reach. If someone inside my own family got paid 40 minutes ago to help Sterling close this deal, I want their name in my hand before sunrise." "Copy that." Maya's fingers moved faster now, adrenaline burning away the last of her nerves. "Drive's at 90%. Almost." A sound cut through her earpiece, sharp, mechanical. "A door." "Someone's coming," Dominic murmured, and she heard him shift, heard the faint scrape of him positioning himself behind the server rack. "Maya, how much longer?" She watched the progress bar crawl toward completion, her pulse pounding in her ears. 20 seconds. "We might not have 20 seconds. "Then don't move," she whispered, eyes fixed on the screen, willing the download to finish. "Just don't move."
The extraction bar hit 100% exactly as footsteps stopped directly outside the server room door. The footsteps passed the door. Maya didn't breathe again until she heard them fade down the corridor. A night cleaner, as it turned out, dragging a cart toward the far end of the floor, utterly indifferent to the fact that a syndicate heir was crouched behind a server rack with a stolen drive of financial secrets in his pocket. Dominic didn't move for a full 60 seconds after the sound disappeared, and neither did Maya, her hand pressed flat against her chest as if she could physically hold her heart in place. "We're clear," he finally murmured. "Moving out." By the time they reached the safe house, a converted hunting lodge deep in the Black Forest that belonged, Dominic explained, to nobody on paper and everybody who mattered. Dawn was breaking grey and cold through the pines. Maya hadn't slept. She didn't intend to, not yet. Not with a hard drive full of answers sitting on the table in front of her. "Coffee," Dominic said, setting a mug beside her laptop before he'd even taken off his coat. It was, Maya realized with a small ache, exactly how she took it. Too much cream, no sugar. 8 months of marriage, and she was only now discovering how closely he'd been paying attention. "Thank you." She didn't look up from the screen. The extraction from Rhineland's servers had unpacked into thousands of files overnight, and she'd spent the drive sorting them by relevance, discarding the noise, chasing the signal. "I've isolated the intermediary account, the one that received the payment 40 minutes before we broke in." "And?" Maya turned the laptop toward him. On screen, a chain of authorization documents, digitally signed and time-stamped, traced backward through 6 months of quiet transactions, small payments at first, then larger ones, culminating in a formal shareholder agreement. "It's Victoria," Maya said quietly. There was no way to soften it, so she didn't try. The account routes through 3 shell layers, but the underlying banking relationship ties directly to a personal trust registered in her name. She didn't just open the door for Rhineland Capital 6 months ago. Maya scrolled further. She signed a formal agreement with Sterling's holding company, guaranteed seat on Sterling Capital Group's new board, effective the moment the Vane Syndicate's controlling shares transfer to him. Dominic said nothing. He stood very still, staring at the screen, and Maya watched something in him go quiet, in a way that frightened her more than his anger would have. "She sold us," he said finally. "Not under threat, not under duress. She negotiated a price." "There's more." Maya's voice gentled, though there was no gentle way to say what came next. "This isn't recent desperation, Dominic. The initial registration, the one that let Rhineland into your asset structure, that's from 6 months ago, before any of this became public. She built this, slowly, patiently. She wasn't reacting to a crisis." Maya met his eyes. She was the architect of it. Sterling built the fraud. Victoria built him the door. Dominic pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, elbows on his knees, and for a long moment he simply stared at the floor of the lodge. Maya didn't fill the silence. She'd learned, over 8 strange months, that Dominic Vane processed pain the way she processed fraud. Quietly, methodically, refusing to move until every piece made sense. "She raised me," he said finally. "After my father died, she was the one who taught me how this world worked, how to survive it." He looked up. "And this whole time, she was deciding how much I was worth to sell." "We don't strike yet," Maya said, and she said it firmly, because she could see exactly where his fury wanted to go, straight at Victoria, immediate and unrestrained, the kind of confrontation that would feel satisfying for about 10 minutes and then hand Sterling every advantage they'd fought for. "If we accuse her now, with no legal framework behind it, she and Sterling spin it as a family dispute, a jealous nephew making wild accusations to avoid a legitimate business deal. We need this locked down, legally, publicly, irreversibly, before she even knows we're onto her." Dominic's jaw worked, the muscle there tight enough that Maya could see the restraint costing him something physical. But he nodded. "How long do you need?" "Days, not hours. I need to build a formal case, regulatory filings, asset freezes on Sterling's end, something with teeth." Maya reached for her coffee, finally,
letting it warm her hands. "But I think we owe her a phone call first." "Why?" "Because right now she doesn't know we know." Maya's eyes were steady. "If we let her keep thinking she's winning, she'll get careless. But if you confront her now, carefully, on your terms, you might learn how deep this actually goes. Whether Sterling's planning anything beyond the shareholder vote. And you get to look her in the eye and tell her you know before the world finds out for her." Dominic considered that for a long moment, then pulled his laptop toward him and opened a secure video line, hands steady now in a way Maya recognized as pure discipline. Victoria answered on the third ring, still in the same suite at the Dolder Grand, makeup fresh, voice bright with the particular energy of a woman who believed her plan was working. "Dominic, I was just about to call you about the vote timeline." "I know about Rhineland," Dominic said, no preamble, his voice flat and cold as the black forest morning outside the window. "I know about your board seat with Sterling. I know exactly what you sold, and exactly what you sold it for." Victoria's bright expression didn't crack immediately. It simply drained, slowly, like color leaving a photograph. For the first time since Maya had known her, Victoria Vane had absolutely nothing to say. "I'm not calling to yell at you," Dominic continued, and Maya heard the enormous effort that restraint was costing him. "I'm calling so you know, before this ends, that I know exactly who you are. Enjoy the next few days, Aunt Victoria. They're the last ones you'll spend thinking you've won." He ended the call before she could answer, and the lodge fell into a silence so complete Maya could hear the wind moving through the pines outside. Luxembourg City in the rain looked exactly like what it was, a small country built entirely on other people's money, its banking district glowing behind glass and discretion. Maya had flown in alone that morning, while Dominic stayed behind to manage what remained of the board, and for the first time since the ballroom in London, she felt something close to her old self. A woman with a briefcase and a purpose, walking into a building where nobody knew her married name. The offices of Halverson and Kessler occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower overlooking the Petrus Valley, one of exactly 4 international compliance firms in the world with the standing to file what Maya was about to request. She'd worked with them years ago, before Dominic, before any of this, back when she was still the anonymous auditor who'd taken down a Manila hedge fund and walked away without a headline.
"Ms. Reyes."
Lucas Halverson rose from behind his desk, silver-haired and precise, the kind of man who'd built a career on never once raising his voice. "It's been a long time. I heard you got married." "I did." Maya set her briefcase on his desk and opened it without further pleasantries. "I need a sovereign asset freeze, emergency filing, confidential, effective within 24 hours. Halverson's eyebrows rose slightly, the closest he came to visible surprise. "Against whom?" "Sterling Capital Group, specifically the offshore liquidity funds routing through this trust structure." She slid a folder across the desk, the evidence she'd spent 3 sleepless days assembling, the Rhineland registration, the custodial trust matched to Sterling's bailout offer, the shareholder agreement tying Victoria's board seat to the collapse of the Vane Syndicate's controlling shares. The forged collateral bonds that triggered the original seizure were manufactured through this exact network. "I can prove Sterling engineered the crisis he's now offering to solve." Halverson read in silence for several long minutes, and Maya watched his expression shift from polite skepticism into something sharper. Compliance lawyers, in her experience, loved exactly 2 things: airtight evidence and the rare, delicious opportunity to freeze a predator mid-strike. "This is remarkably thorough," he said finally. "You built this in 3 days?" "I had help." Maya thought of Dominic, of the 2 of them working in shifts through the lodge's long nights, him running down every corporate registration by phone while she traced money through spreadsheets until her eyes burned. "The filing needs to be confidential until it's executed. If Sterling gets wind of it before the freeze is active, he'll move the funds within hours. A sovereign asset freeze of this scale requires triple verification before execution, Halverson said, already reaching for his phone. Normally, that's a week's process. I don't have a week. Neither does the family I married into. Halverson studied her for a long moment. Then something in his careful expression softened, just slightly. An old colleague recognizing old instincts. You always did work like the building was on fire, Reyes. Give me 48 hours. I'll push it through on your reputation and my own neck. Make it 36, Maya said. I have a feeling Sterling isn't planning to wait much longer either. She was right. 200 miles away, Dominic sat across a table from 3 of Sterling's regional enforcers in a private dining room overlooking Rotterdam's harbor. Men whose job titles were logistics consultants and whose actual function Maya had learned over 8 months not to ask too many questions about. It was a meeting Dominic had requested himself, framed as a good-faith gesture. Let's discuss terms before the vote, man to man, away from the lawyers. It was, in reality, exactly what he and Maya had planned in the lodge 2 nights earlier. A distraction, carefully engineered to keep Sterling's attention locked on the physical world, while Maya moved unnoticed through the financial one. Your board seems eager to settle, said the eldest of the 3, a broad man named Krantz, whose accent Maya had told Dominic to place as Rotterdam-based, likely tied to Sterling's port operations. Why the resistance, Mr. Vane? 51% isn't total control. You'd stay on as figurehead. Figurehead, Dominic repeated, letting the word sit in the air with the particular stillness Maya had come to recognize as his most dangerous mood. Not the loud fury of a man losing his temper, but the quiet calculation of one who'd already decided how this would end, and was simply enjoying watching the other side not know it yet. My grandfather built this company from a single shipping license. My father expanded it across 4 continents, and you want me to hand 51% of it to a man I met 3 days ago because he offered me a check with a deadline attached. Deadlines have a way of clarifying priorities, Krantz said, smiling without warmth. They do, Dominic agreed. He poured himself more wine, unhurried, and let the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Tell me, does Mr. Sterling always negotiate through intermediaries? I'd have expected him here himself, given how much he wants this deal to close. Mr. Sterling has other priorities this week. I imagine he does. Dominic smiled, the kind of smile Maya would have recognized instantly as a man who already knew exactly what those other priorities were about to become. Let's discuss terms, gentlemen. I have all evening. He kept them there for 3 hours, circling terms, raising objections, offering counter-proposals he had no intention of honoring, every minute a deliberate theft of Sterling's attention away from the one place it actually needed to be. At 11:47 p.m., Maya's phone buzzed once against the hotel desk in Luxembourg. Freeze executed. Sterling's primary liquidity accounts locked as of 11:45 p.m. Confidential, not yet visible on public filings. You have roughly 6 hours before his legal team notices the funds won't move. Maya exhaled a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 days and typed a single message back to Dominic's secure line, the one only the 2 of them used. It's done. The trap is set. He just doesn't know it yet. Across the water in Rotterdam, Dominic's phone buzzed against his leg beneath the table. He didn't check it immediately. He simply raised his glass toward Krantz and the 2 silent men beside him and smiled the smile of a man who had just watched the entire board silently tilt in his favor. To productive negotiations, gentlemen, he said. I have a feeling we'll be speaking again very soon. The call came at 4 a.m., yanking Dominic out of the first real sleep he'd managed in 4 days. Sir, his head of logistics, voice tight with barely controlled panic. Rotterdam. Someone's blockaded the cargo terminals, all 3 of them. We have 6 ships sitting in the harbor that can't unload, and 2 more inbound with nowhere to dock. Dominic was already moving, phone against his ear, pulling on yesterday's shirt in the dark of the lodge's upstairs bedroom. Maya stirred behind him, awake instantly the way she'd become in the last 4 days. The two of them had stopped sleeping like people who trusted the world to leave them alone. "Whose blockade?" Dominic asked, though he already knew. "Private security contractors. They've got Port Authority paperwork, sir, or something that looks like it, claiming environmental compliance violations on the syndicate's shipping licenses. It's bogus, but it's legal-looking bogus, which means we can't just force our way through." Dominic closed his eyes for a moment. Sterling. Of course it was Sterling. His liquidity had frozen 6 hours ago, invisible to him until his legal team woke up and found every account locked. And rather than sitting quietly while his empire crumbled, the man had reached for the one lever still in his hand. Physical leverage. Brute and immediate. The oldest kind. "Rotterdam's our last open cash flow," Dominic said, more to Maya than to the phone, as she sat up and reached for her laptop without needing to be asked. "Everything else routes through frozen accounts. If those terminals stay shut more than 48 hours, we can't make payroll for 6,000 people across 3 countries. Maya was already scanning the regulatory filing Halverson had sent through overnight, cross-referencing timestamps. "Dominic, this can't be a coincidence. Sterling's accounts froze at 11:45 last night. The blockade paperwork is dated 1 a.m. She looked up. "He found out almost immediately. Someone tipped him off." "Or he simply expected it," Dominic said grimly, already pulling on his coat. "A man who builds a trap this careful plans for the trap being sprung back on him. He's not panicking, Maya. He's improvising exactly the way we did in Frankfurt." It was, Maya realized with a chill, the first time either of them had said it out loud, that Sterling wasn't merely a predator circling wounded prey. He was a mirror. Patient, adaptive, dangerous in exactly the same ways they were learning to be. "I need to be on the ground in Rotterdam within the hour," Dominic said. "This is a physical problem. Ships, docks, port authorities who need to see the family names standing on the terminal in person, not hear about it through lawyers." "And I need to finish the regulatory paperwork," Maya said, already pulling files onto a secure drive. "The formal fraud complaint against Sterling, the one that makes the asset freeze permanent and public instead of a quiet 48-hour window. I can't file it from a moving car, Dominic. I need Monaco. The International Financial Crimes Registrar's regional office is there, and it's the only jurisdiction with authority to act on both the Frankfurt evidence and the Luxembourg freeze simultaneously." They looked at each other for a long moment. The first time in 4 days they'd have to split apart completely. Him toward physical danger, her toward paperwork that would decide everything. "Rotterdam first," Dominic said. "I'll buy you the time, however long you need." "You don't know how long I need." "Then I'll buy you all of it." He crossed the room and kissed her, quick and hard, the kind of kiss that carried more truth in it than 8 months of careful, guarded marriage had managed to say out loud. "Go finish this, Maya, whatever it takes." Rotterdam's port at dawn was chaos dressed up as bureaucracy. 6 massive cargo ships sitting motionless in grey water, private security in unmarked vests standing at every terminal gate, with clipboards and expressions carefully rehearsed to look official. Dominic arrived with 4 syndicate logistics executives and, more usefully, 2 actual Dutch Port Authority officials he'd called personally at 5 a.m., men who'd known his father for 20 years and owed the Vane name more favors than Sterling's rented lawyers could buy in a week. "These environmental citations are fabricated," Dominic said, standing on the dock in the cold wind, voice pitched to carry across the assembled crowd of dock workers, security contractors, and increasingly nervous port officials. "Every vessel here passed compliance inspection 11 days ago. I have the certificates. Where are theirs?" The lead security contractor shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward a man in a suit hovering at the edge of the group. Sterling's man, clearly, though he wisely stayed silent rather than get directly involved. "We're acting on filed paperwork, sir," the contractor said. "Not our place to dispute it." "Then it's my place." Dominic turned to the senior Dutch official, a grey-haired man named Voss, who'd sailed on Vane cargo ships as a young inspector 30 years earlier.
Peter, you know this family. You know this port. Look at the paperwork yourself. Voss studied the citation documents for several long minutes, while 6,000 jobs and the last liquid cash flow of an empire hung on his silence. Finally, he looked up.
"These filing numbers don't match our registry," Voss said flatly. "This is not a legitimate compliance action. Someone printed documents to look like one." He turned to the security contractors. "You have 30 minutes to clear this terminal, or I call in Federal Maritime Police for obstruction." The blockade didn't collapse all at once. It took another 2 hours of tense negotiation, a few phone calls Dominic made with his jaw set and his voice iron calm, and the slow, grudging withdrawal of Sterling's rented muscle from 3 separate terminals. But by 9 a.m., the first ship's crane groaned back to life, containers moving again, cash flow beginning its slow crawl back toward the accounts that hadn't yet been frozen. Dominic stood on the dock as the port roared back to noise and motion around him, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and pulled out his phone. "Rotterdam's clear," he typed to Maya. "You have your time. Finish it." Her reply came seconds later, 3 words that told him everything he needed to know about how close they finally were. "Monaco's ready. Come." The International Regulatory Summit occupied the Salle des Étoiles in Monte Carlo, a ballroom so ornate it seemed designed to make even seasoned financiers feel small. Gilded ceilings, a wall of glass overlooking the harbor, 300 delegates from banking authorities across 40 countries gathered for what the official program called a routine quarterly session on cross-border compliance. Nothing about what was about to happen was routine. Maya stood in a service corridor just off the main floor, watching through a gap in the doors as Gabriel Sterling took the podium. He looked immaculate. More so than he had in Zurich, if that was possible. A man radiating the particular confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. Beside him stood Victoria, composed once more, dressed in ivory as though she were attending a wedding rather than presiding over the dismantling of her own family's legacy. "Distinguished delegates," Sterling began, his voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustics. "What you're about to witness is a rare thing in our industry. A family recognizing, with grace, that survival sometimes requires evolution." Maya's jaw tightened. Behind her, she heard the soft click of the corridor door and turned to find Dominic, still faintly windblown from Rotterdam, dressed now in a dark suit that made him look every inch the man his father had raised him to be. "You made it," she breathed. "I told you I'd buy you the time." His eyes moved past her to the ballroom floor, to Sterling, to Victoria standing at his side like a prize already claimed. Something hard settled over his features. "Is everything filed?" "Halverson executed the permanent freeze at 7 this morning. Sterling's liquidity funds are locked under formal fraud investigation, effective globally as of 2 hours ago." Maya held up the leather folder in her hands, the master dossier, 3 days and nights of work compressed into 40 pages of forensic evidence. But the filing alone won't stop this vote. If Sterling gets the board's signatures today, before the freeze becomes public knowledge, he'll argue the transfer was legally binding, regardless of what comes after. Then we make sure it doesn't stay quiet. Dominic looked at her, and something passed between them. Not quite a question, because they both already knew the answer. "Are you ready?" Maya thought of the ballroom in London 8 days ago. Victoria's folder of divorce papers, £5 million to disappear with her dignity intact. She thought of every room in this story where she'd been underestimated, dismissed, treated as a decoration on Dominic Vane's arm, rather than the woman who'd spent 3 sleepless days building the case that was about to end an empire's collapse. "I've been ready since the vault in Zurich," she said. Dominic didn't go through the service corridor. He walked straight through the ballroom's main doors, and the effect was immediate. 300 heads turning as one, a ripple of recognition and murmured surprise spreading outward from the entrance. Security moved instinctively toward him, then hesitated, uncertain, because everyone in that room knew exactly who Dominic Vane was, and exactly how dangerous it would be to lay hands on him without cause. Dominic. Sterling's smile flickered, just slightly, recalibrating in real time. This is a closed session. I have every right to be present at a vote determining the ownership of my own family's company. Dominic's voice carried effortlessly, calm and absolute, drawing every eye in the hall toward him and away from Sterling's carefully constructed narrative. He walked to the center of the floor, unhurried, forcing security, delegates, and Sterling himself to reorient entirely around his presence. Please, continue. I'm curious to hear how you plan to explain the transfer documents without me. Sterling's aides exchanged a glance. Victoria's composure cracked at the edges, her eyes darting toward the exits, as though some part of her already understood what was coming. It was in that exact moment, every eye in the room locked on Dominic, security still deciding whether to intervene, Sterling scrambling to recover the room's attention, that the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened again. Maya walked in. She'd chosen the dress deliberately that morning, in the hotel room overlooking the harbor. Deep midnight blue, structured and severe, nothing like the soft pastel gown Victoria had humiliated her in 8 days earlier. She carried the leather dossier against her chest like armor, and she walked the length of that glittering ballroom floor without hurrying, without flinching, 300 delegates turning to watch the woman Victoria Vane had once called a gold digger cross the marble in silence so complete you could hear her heels against the floor.
Mrs. Vane. One of the regulatory chairs, a stern-faced woman Maya recognized from Halverson's briefing materials as the summit's presiding officer, rose slightly from her seat. This session is not open to... I'm here to submit evidence directly relevant to a fraud investigation your own commission opened 2 hours ago, Maya said, her voice steady, pitched to carry to the back of the hall. She opened the dossier and held it aloft, not for the officer alone, but for the room, for the cameras she knew were recording every regulatory summit for archival purposes, for the delegates from 40 countries who were about to become witnesses to something none of them would forget. The collateral bonds that triggered the freeze on Vane Syndicate assets 8 days ago were forged. I can prove who forged them, how, and why, and I can prove that the man standing at this podium offering you all a rescue is the very same man who manufactured the crisis he claims to be solving. Sterling's composure finally, visibly, broke. This is absurd theater, he said, too quickly, his voice pitched half a note higher than it had been moments before. A hysterical wife making accusations to save her husband's failing empire. I'm not his wife today, Mr. Sterling. Maya reached the podium and set the dossier down beside him with a soft, deliberate thud that seemed to echo through the sudden silence of the hall. Today, I'm a forensic auditor with 11 years of experience tracing fraud through shell companies exactly like Rhineland Capital Partners, the one registered to your custodial trust structure, the one that opened the door for $400 million in forged collateral bonds. She looked out at the assembled delegates, at the cameras, at Victoria's stricken face and Sterling's frozen smile. And I'd like the floor, please. It won't take long to show you exactly what he's done. The presiding officer hesitated only a moment before nodding, curiosity and duty overriding protocol. You have the floor, Mrs. Vane. 15 minutes. I'll need less than that, Maya said, and turned to face 300 of the world's most powerful banking regulators, with the same steady focus she'd once used to bring down a hedge fund in Manila without ever raising her voice. She opened the dossier and gestured, and the ballroom's main screen, the one Sterling's team had wired for his own triumphant presentation, flickered to life with the first exhibit instead, a side-by-side comparison of 2 digital signatures. 8 days ago, the Vane Syndicate's accounts were frozen due to $400 million in forged collateral bonds, Maya began. The bonds were dated 18 months back, but their verification stamps use a signature protocol that did not exist commercially 18 months ago.
Someone backdated evidence to manufacture a crisis. She clicked forward. That signature pattern is a known fingerprint of engineered hostile takeovers. Manufacture the emergency, tank the target's credit rating, then arrive with a rescue offer timed perfectly to a boardroom's desperation. A murmur moved through the hall. Sterling's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, watching, waiting for an opening that wasn't coming. 6 months before the freeze, Maya continued, the next exhibit appearing behind her. A scanned page from the Zurich ledger, handwritten and undeniable. A valuation transfer was authorized inside the Vane Syndicate's foundational asset structure. It granted legal standing to a shell company called Rhineland Capital Partners, registered in Frankfurt. This transfer opened a door that let forged bonds enter the syndicate's books 8 days ago. She let that sit for a moment. The authorization required emergency single-party override, a power held by exactly 3 people. One of them is standing at this podium beside Mr. Sterling. Every head in the room turned toward Victoria. Maya didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on the delegates, because this wasn't personal anymore. It was proof, laid out the way proof deserved to be laid out, clean and undeniable.
Rhineland Capital's servers in Frankfurt, Maya went on, the screen shifting to the extracted transaction logs. Confirm the fabrication directly. Encrypted logs show the same infrastructure that manufactured the forged bond trail also processed the custodial trust behind Mr. Sterling's $500 million rescue offer. The same registration format, the same offshore jurisdiction, the same legal architecture. She turned, finally, towards Sterling. You didn't come here to save this family, Mr. Sterling. You came to collect on a crisis you built yourself. These are fabrications, Sterling said, but his voice had lost its polish, cracking at the edges under 300 pairs of watching eyes. Stolen data, illegally obtained. The data is authenticated and time-stamped, Maya said calmly. And, as of this morning, it forms the basis of a formal sovereign asset freeze against Sterling Capital Group's primary liquidity funds, filed through Luxembourg's International Compliance Authority 2 hours before this session began. She let the final exhibit fill the screen, the freeze order itself, stamped, sealed, irreversible. Your accounts are already locked, Mr. Sterling. You've been operating this entire summit on money you can no longer touch. The silence that followed had weight to it, the particular stillness of a room realizing in real time that the story it had gathered to witness was not the one it had been told to expect. And Victoria, Maya said, turning at last to the woman who'd called her a gold digger in a London ballroom 8 days ago, whose voice had never once wavered while offering £5 million for Maya's dignity. Authorized the shareholder agreement guaranteeing her a board seat with Sterling Capital Group, dated the same week she opened the door for his fraud to enter this family's books. She didn't just fail to protect the Vane Syndicate, she sold it, piece by piece, to the man standing beside her. Victoria's face had gone the color of old paper. She opened her mouth. To deny it, perhaps, or to explain, though there was no explanation left that could survive the dossier now displayed for the entire regulatory summit to see. Nothing came out. For the first time since Maya had known her, Victoria Vane had no words at all. The presiding officer rose fully now, her expression grave. Mrs. Vane, this commission will need 48 hours to formally verify. The evidence has already been independently authenticated by Halverson and Kessler, submitted with this morning's freeze filing, Maya said. I understand due process, but I'd ask the Commission to consider one thing while you deliberate. Every hour this vote proceeds is another hour Mr. Sterling has to move whatever assets remain beyond your reach. The officer studied Maya for a long moment, then looked to her fellow commissioners. A brief and silent conference passing between them with the ease of people who'd clearly seen enough evidence in their careers to know real proof from theater.
This commission finds sufficient cause, she announced finally, her voice carrying across the stunned ballroom.
to immediately lift the freeze on all legitimate Vane Syndicate assets, pending formal review of today's evidence. Furthermore, an international arrest warrant is authorized for Gabriel Sterling, effective immediately, on charges of securities fraud, forgery, and market manipulation. Two security officers who'd been standing quietly near the ballroom side entrance moved forward at last, and Sterling, for all his silver-tongued confidence, all his careful architecture of crisis and rescue, simply stood there for a moment, staring at Maya with something between fury and grudging, disbelieving respect, before he was led from the hall in full view of 300 witnesses who would tell this story for years. Dominic crossed the floor to stand beside Maya as the room erupted into a roar of voices, cameras, delegates already reaching for their phones.
He didn't say anything at first. He simply looked at her, the dossier still open on the podium, the freeze order glowing on the screen behind her, the empire she'd just saved standing solid again for the first time in 8 days.
"You were never the gold digger in this family," he said quietly, just for her. "You were always the one holding it together." Maya closed the dossier, exhaled the breath she felt like she'd been holding since a ballroom in London, and allowed herself, finally, to smile. Lake Como in the evening light looked like something painted rather than real. The water burnished gold, the hills folding into soft violet shadow, the Vane family's Italian estate rising in pale stone above terraced gardens that had been tended for over a century. It was, Maya thought, as their car wound up the long drive 2 days after Monte Carlo, the first place in this entire ordeal that had felt like it was breathing rather than holding its breath.
"Nervous?" Dominic asked, watching her hands in her lap.
"A little." She managed a small laugh. "Strange, isn't it? I stood in front of 300 regulators and dismantled a fraud case live on camera, and a board meeting still makes my palms sweat." "That's because Monte Carlo was proving something to strangers." Dominic reached over and covered her hand with his, steady and warm. "Today is different. Today is family." The board meeting itself was smaller than any gathering Maya had attended since the inauguration gala that had started all of this. Just the 9 trustees who remained after Victoria's exile, seated around a long table on the estate's covered terrace, the lake glittering behind them through open doors. Victoria wasn't there. She'd been formally removed from every Vane Syndicate holding 3 days earlier, her personal accounts under separate investigation, her name already fading from conversations the way names did in this world once their usefulness had run out. Maya had expected to feel some flicker of satisfaction at that. Instead, watching the empty chair at the table's far end, she felt only a quiet, complicated sadness. For the woman Victoria might have been, if greed hadn't outpaced loyalty. Dominic stood at the head of the table, and the trustees fell silent without needing to be asked twice. 11 days ago, he began, this family's entire legacy was seized in front of 300 witnesses at what was supposed to be my inauguration. Some of you in this room believed, quietly or otherwise, that the syndicate might not survive it. He let that land, unhurried, the way Maya had watched him learn to do over the last 11 days, not performing authority, simply holding it. We survived because of one person, not because of my name, not because of this family's history, and certainly not because of anyone who was supposed to be protecting it from the inside. He looked at Maya, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. Maya Reyes traced a forged signature to a hostile takeover before anyone else in this room understood we were even under attack. She found the shell company that opened our own vault to fraud. She built the legal case that froze Sterling's funds before he could move them beyond our reach. And she stood in front of an international regulatory summit and dismantled a $400 million conspiracy with nothing but evidence and 11 years of expertise that this family dismissed at first as irrelevant to a marriage of convenience. A few of the older trustees shifted uncomfortably. Maya recognized 2 of them from that ballroom in London, men who'd watched Victoria hand her a divorce agreement and said nothing. Effective today, Dominic continued, I am naming Maya Reyes Chief Operating Officer of the Vane Syndicate and sole trustee of our Global Holdings compliance and asset structure, with full authority over every financial framework this family builds going forward." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was the particular stillness of people recalculating an entire hierarchy in real time. One trustee, a sharp-eyed woman named Elise, who'd been on the board since before Dominic's father died, finally spoke.
"With respect, Dominic, the syndicate has never placed someone from outside the bloodline in a role of this authority."
"The syndicate has also never survived a coordinated fraud of this scale," Dominic said evenly. "Bloodline didn't save us 11 days ago. Bloodline, in fact, was the vulnerability Sterling exploited." His eyes moved deliberately to Victoria's empty chair, and nobody in the room needed the point explained further. "Competence saved us. I intend to build this family's future around competence, starting now." Maya rose from her seat, and for a moment, she let herself remember the woman who'd stood at that London gala 11 days ago, holding a warm champagne glass, absorbing a public humiliation with nowhere to put her anger except silence. That woman felt impossibly distant now.
"I know some of you are wondering whether I earned this seat, or whether I was simply handed it," Maya said, addressing the table directly.
"I understand the question. I'd ask it myself in your position." She let her gaze move across each trustee in turn. "So I won't ask you to trust me because Dominic vouches for me. I'll ask you to judge me the way you'd judge anyone in this role, by what I do with the authority I've been given. Starting with a full independent audit of every asset structure in this family's holdings, beginning next week, so that what happened with Rhineland Capital Partners never happens again, to anyone, regardless of what surname they carry." Elise studied her for a long moment. Then something that might have been the beginning of respect crossed her weathered face. "That's a fair answer, Mrs. Vane." "It's Miss Reyes Vane, if it's all the same to you," Maya said, and there was a small ripple of genuine, surprised laughter around the table, the first laughter that room had heard in 11 exhausting days. Later, after the trustees had dispersed into the gardens and the lake had turned to deep indigo under the first stars, Maya found Dominic standing alone at the terrace railing, looking out over the water. "Regrets?" she asked, joining him. "None." He pulled her against his side, and for the first time since the night the sirens tore through that London ballroom, she felt him fully at rest, not braced for the next attack, not calculating the next move, simply present. 11 days ago, my family called you a gold digger in front of everyone I know. Today, you're the reason any of us still have something worth calling an empire." Maya looked out at the water, at the lights of the estate reflected across its surface, at the life she hadn't expected but had somehow, through fire and forged bonds and sleepless nights, earned entirely on her own terms. "Then let's build something worth keeping," she said. Dominic turned, and in the fading light of Lake Como, he kissed her. Not as an apology, not as a debt repaid, but as a promise between equals who had, finally, found their true balance.